one of the first things you asked about was talking about the young. And this is something that every one of these 5 men has done. They have created a generation of children who are actually then literally forced into youth groups. We would call them the Boy Scouts here. They replaced the Boy Scouts and other existing youth groups with party groups. Mussolini had the Balila. These are little boys and girls in military uniforms with a big M on them. Hitler has the Hitler Youth, replaced all of the religious and existing youth organizations. This creates a whole generation of children indoctrinated to believe that this leader, this great leader, is the only one who can solve the country's problem. And that is something they all like to say as well. We have heard those words in recent years. I alone can fix this. This is what these men also say. So there are
pause there for a second, because there was curriculum or a desire to put. So we don't have youth organizations. We have a school system where a president can tell what the curriculum should be. Is that in line with that?
I don't think so. In a realistic sense, in the United States educational system, no. We're having that argument right now where, there's been pushback. For instance, look at how many schools did pick up on the 1619 project and start to teach it and start to put it into the curriculum, despite the fact that it had its critics. But people recognize we have got to do a better job of telling the story, an argument I've been making for a very long time, as you know, Karen. But the president then came out and said that's not the story we're going to tell. They're teaching us to hate America. They're teaching us. So we're having this argument right now, and there's been considerable pushback against that. We don't have one educational system in this country. We have at least 50. Each state makes its own determinations, and then of course there are other places, and then even within states, local boards and local jurisdictions are given great leeway. So we don't have.
I do think that. I just want to say that while that is definitely true, the reality is, however, there are so few proprietors of education textbooks and curriculum that is then disseminated throughout the country. For example, Texas produces an extraordinary amount of the curricular materials that go into classrooms all across the country. So while the current president couldn't say we want the 1776 curriculum, which I guess is his answer to the 1619 curriculum, to be taught in schools, we already have an education system that does enshrine American history from the white experience. And having this sort of unleashing of explicit white supremacy and the justification of white nationalism, he's literally made it cool to be a white nationalist again, certainly does lead us to a position where people in positions of power who agree with that ideology would be able to then exercise their influence to ensure that we are further entrenched in that type of education. And Karen, to your point, while we have the Boy Scouts here, but we most certainly during the post and the era of Hitler had similar American Bunds that were there to do the same types of things. So we had camps all across the country, some even in the state of New York, where children were literally being indoctrinated with a pro-Nazi ideology, which really was the private homeschool version, I guess, of the white supremacy that sort of was a constant thread throughout traditional American education.
I agree with you completely, and I've been making the same arguments for a long time. So we're really on the same side of the page. What I would say is that I spend a lot of time speaking to teachers and educators about these very subjects. And I know that the teachers who are in the front lines do not accept that ideology that's being presented to them. And there's a lot of pushback in the educational community. There are lots of bigger problems, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds of it. What's wrong with
we only have like 3 minutes
here.
left, so I want you to unpack as quickly as possible so we get all of these gems.
the education system needs a lot of work, but we certainly have to spend a lot more time on teaching history and social studies, and many more teachers are bringing in books like mine and the 1619 Project because they recognize the deep, deep flaws and mistakes of the past, and they are trying very hard to address that. They're often up against administrations and school boards that aren't too interested, but they are pushing back. There's a lot of pushback. The problem is that the education system is so fixated on standardized testing right now that time for teaching social studies and civics has disappeared. It's really not even on the back of the stove. It's been taken off the stove. There's a huge movement right now, grassroots movement for more civic engagement, including in New York City, where the mayor was actually spearheading that movement 2 years ago. So they are trying. Now, we have a long way to go. And part of this comes back to what we are talking about here in terms of strongman. The only way, and I think I'm going to answer your question from a while ago, the only way we fight back against this is by using our voices. And we have multiple ways to use our voices. First, of course, is this. We vote. Yeah. But voting is only part of it. And of course, when John Lewis was 18 years old, he couldn't vote. He was too young and he was too black. So he still went out and did something. Right now, there are young people in this country, and to me, they're a model. There are young people in this country who can't vote, but they are making their voices heard. Climate change, gun safety, Black Lives Matter. These are movements being led by young people, and they've somehow got the message that social studies and history should be teaching them, which is that you have a voice even if you don't have a vote, and that most of the changes in this country's history have come from the bottom up, not the top down. And that's one of the most important lessons of history that I have tried to emphasize over the years. Now, this is a big, big struggle, though. I mean, we're talking about systemic problems and attacks on some of the very institutions that are our most important defenders. And first among them is the media. And every one of these strongmen down the line moves quickly to take control of the media in the nations they control, because they know that to control the media is to control information, is to control thought. And so that is why that's such an important piece of this. And it's one of the things that we haven't completely surrendered yet in the United States is the idea of press freedom. The press can be maddening sometimes in its approach to these questions, but it is one of the main lines of defense against a future strongman.